Here we are at part 8 of the upper extremity, and in this case we're going to be looking at the posterior forearm. And we do have more than one layer of muscles here, but they're not as complex actually as the anterior, and that's because our flexors are actually much stronger actually and more complex than our extensors. So we do more with the flexor side because we hold objects in our hands and manipulate things with our hands. And extensors are really just for letting go, I suppose you could say. Or you could say also for using the backhand whenever we use our tools. So we begin here with the, how shall I say, the lateral epicondyle as an origin, and we move this way. And I'm actually going to begin out here. Do you remember that I mentioned to you that you can pinch the side of your forearm right here? Okay, so as you pinch this side of the forearm between your thumb and your forefinger, you're actually holding three muscles. It's this one right here, the first one that's most superficial is the brachioradialis, and then the next one is underneath that is going to be the extensor carpi radialis longus. That comes all the way down this way. Do you see it? Coming all the way down here this way. And then we have the next one in. So 1, 2, 3 muscles. This is the extensor carpi radialis brevis. Okay, just a little 1, 2, 3 right there. And they list it for us here in that order. Okay, brachialis, extensor carpi radialis longus, and brevis. And they sort of occupy that space that I just described that you can pinch. Okay, and then these are all innervated by the radial nerve. They don't discuss that here with us for the brachioradialis, but nevertheless, you can see that we're starting from the lateral supracondylar ridge of the humerus, which is really another way of just saying an aspect of the lateral epicondyle, and lateral epicondyle here as well. And where we're going here is we're going to the second metacarpal with the longus, and we're going to the third metacarpal for the brevis. Okay, and they're basically about extending the wrist. All right, they cross the wrist. The wrist can be thought of as having more than one joint. There's a proximal and a distal wrist sort of area because of the 8 bones. Okay, so at any rate, we're extending the wrist, and then everything else here is sort of somewhat secondary. There is some abduction, etc. Okay, then the next layer down in here across the back of the hand, and you can see this, and there is some complexity to this. So I will note here that we have the extensor digitorum, and it's not superficialis or profundus, it's just simply extensor digitorum. There's just the one layer of muscle that goes to fingers 2, 3, 4, and 5, and they end in what is referred to as the extensor expansion. So extensor expansion. So there's a great deal of connective tissue across the backs of the fingers here, 2 through 5, and that's where these muscle tendons are going to. Okay, now notice that this finger right here and also this finger right here actually has 2 tendons, and that's because there is an extensor indicus that exists independently of the extensor indicus right here, that exists independently of the extensor digitorum, which is way back here. Okay, as we get to the deeper area here, we can see that here we have the extensor indicus. Okay, and also now, since we get below the level of the extensor digitorum, we can see these deeper muscles here, the extensor pollicis brevis, longus rather, and then brevis. Okay, so so that's the idea here. That let me also digress a little bit back over here and mention that, first of all, when we have extension of these fingers, we also get flaring of the fingers, which is natural. Okay, and then the other aspect is something you do as a child sometimes is you try to get your friends to lift these two fingers, which is very difficult while you're pressing all four down, and then lifting these two fingers is easier because they each have their own extensor. Okay, these fingers don't have their own personal extensor, so they're harder to lift up from this position. Okay, the other thing here is that we have, do you see how there is a tendon that's showing up here as I extend my thumb? That's the extensor digitorum longus, and then just next to it, you could say to your left, is the brevis. I can just see the little bit of it, and in between the two is a anatomical snuff box. Right, so you can pop apparently some tobacco perhaps or something else in there, and that would be your snuff box. Okay, so what else can we be describing here? What I particularly like, actually, is this little wrap around here. Isn't that nice? There is the extensor pollicis brevis, so the snuff box is right in between these two tendons as you extend the thumb. Okay, and then there is something here that's called the abductor pollicis longus. So that's important for us to observe. So not only do we have extension, but 90 degrees this way, we have abduction. Okay, so that's part of the program. Alrighty, and then we have, this is a flexor over here, so that's not part of this posterior grouping. Okay, so we have all of these on the posterior aspect are radial nerve innervations. Now there's one more here that is referred to as the supinator, and let's take a look here at the deep situation here. Here is the supinator. The supinator is this one. Do you see where the fascicles are going? In the case of the pronator or the supinator, we're always going to end up on the radial side. Now, if you're on the back side of the forearm and you're connected to the radius, you'll be pulling the radius this way, which means you'll get the hand to flip up in a supine position. So we're calling it supinator. If you're on the medial side, on this side, and you pull on the radius, it's going to go this way. So those are the pronators. Okay, so it's pretty straightforward, I think. You shouldn't have a problem with that.